All right, earlier today I sat down with Senator Kevin Cramer. We talked about Veterans Day and also about the election situation and much, much more. Here is our conversation. Senator Cramer, welcome back to Point of View. Great to have you on this Veterans Day, knowing that you're on the Senate Veterans Affairs Committee, also the Armed Services Committee. So we got a lot to talk about. But let's start with obviously our incredible veterans and the men and women that serve. Just want to give you a chance to comment on what Veterans Day means to you.
Well, it means the world to me, and it ought to mean the world to every free person in the United States, which is every person in the United States, living in the freest country in the world, where we get to exercise our liberties every single day. And when we don't, we need to be reminded of the price. You know, North Dakota is home to something like 58,000 veterans, Chris. We have a very high percentage of our population that is served. So it's especially rewarding for me to represent such a large block of veterans who've been willing in their lifetime to give it all for our liberties. And so I love Veterans Day. I love celebrating it. I wish our students and kids, we're in school learning about Veterans Day rather than taking the day off to go to the mall or whatever it is they do sometimes. But good parents take their kids to Veterans Day events or show them things, and hopefully they all understand what a remarkable privilege it is to live in the freest country in the world. And hopefully they think to thank a veteran for that freedom, because it's really something.
Amen to that. I mean, because of them, you and I can sit here and do what we want to do. I want to touch on something that brings it really to people's dinners tables for a moment, then we'll get into some more of the other things that have been happening. But one of the questions I keep getting from people, because with this COVID situation, they're having some challenges. They're struggling. You're on the banking committee. So two things. One, when do you think the next stimulus check is going to get passed from you guys? And two, why didn't President Trump just call up Secretary Mnuchin and go, hey, send out the Trump bucks. Let's put $1,200 in people's accounts?
Well, on the second point, it's because he doesn't have the authority to do that. We have a very strong executive in our president compared to a lot of other places. He's not a premier. He's not a head of parliament. But he also has limits on his power, and particularly the power to spend money. That, of course, comes from Congress. And he can present a budget, but only Congress can appropriate. So he couldn't do that. I think he did everything he could. He used every tool in the tool chest, particularly with the extension of unemployment insurance benefits. As we know, he was able to move some money around that had been appropriated, but he can't just simply send checks out. So secondly, when's the next round happening? I'm not so sure, Chris. We're now in this lame duck session. I actually think it's not a bad time to get some things done. The reality is that we've just had, again, the largest growth in the economy in a quarter in the history of the country by far. We have an unemployment rate now in the country down to 6.9%. I would say this, I think it's very fragile. I know that a lot of people just look at the numbers and they say, wow, we're doing great. Well, we're doing better, but I do worry about the fragility of it. To be honest, in the next package, I want to be more focused than just simply sending out the Trump bucks, the $1,200 or whatever it is per person. To be honest with you, sending more discretionary money into people's mailboxes without opening the economy doesn't do a lot of good. It doesn't any more than it helps to pay the restaurant owners salaries and wages for several more months, but don't let him open up and don't let him have a full house. We've got to get the economy up and running. And then I think with some focused help on small businesses, on unemployment insurance benefits for those who simply can't work because of the kind of work they're in, mainly a lot of focus of dollars on hospitals and healthcare facilities as the frontline workers, as well as getting that vaccine done and getting it distributed along with therapeutics. And then, of course, just making sure that our kids can go to school safely. I think we can get it done without having to spend trillions of dollars. And I think right now Nancy Pelosi is probably feeling not quite as like she has quite much leverage as she had a couple of weeks ago. So I think we can get something done yet this year.
So you think before the end of the year?
I really do. What I think will happen, Chris, we have to fund the government. It's only funded through December 11th with a continuing resolution. So we'll have to do some sort of a appropriations bill. The appropriations bills are starting to move now in the Senate. And I really think that what we'll see is some sort of a modest targeted package that becomes part of that year-end spending bill. And we can go into the holiday season at least having provided some certainty to people. And I think that'd be really important.
Yeah, I get a lot of feedback from people. Hey, we need some help out here. So let's get into these election results that have not been certified. More on that on a moment, but I want to just get your reaction to this. This is President Trump yesterday saying that we will win. We all know what the media is telling us. I don't know where in the Constitution it says the media gets to dictate the president-elect, but I just want to get your reaction to this. So President Trump says we will win. And then yesterday, I thought this was Secretary of State Mike Pompeo gets asked about the transition. Here's what he said for our audience. We'll let you react.
There will be a smooth transition to a second Trump administration. Right.
So does President Trump and the Secretary of State know something that the rest of us don't? And if so, do you think that there's going to be a second Trump administration?
Well, a couple things. First of all, with regard to Secretary Pompeo, Mike's a good friend of mine. I sat right next to him on the Energy and Commerce Committee in the House. He's a very funny guy, and I think right there he was being quite funny. I think that was pretty obvious, actually. The problem is that the media in Washington is so serious about itself that it can't have a sense of humor. In fact, there's a great saying: "Beware of the zealots, for they are generally humorless." And that definitely I think describes the New York and Washington D.C. media. So I think Mike was being funny, and I thought it was pretty funny, as a matter of fact, because I think his follow-up to that was quite good. And that is, we're going to have a peaceful transition, whether it's 4 more years of a Trump administration or it's 4 years of a Biden administration. We just will have a transition. I talked to the president on Monday night. He and I had a short conversation. He called up, and I just encouraged him. I said, "Hey, we're with you. Every legal fight you want to take on, you're entitled to do that." You certainly have several close races in states that, first of all, pollsters said he was going to get clobbered in, and then the media called, and then all of a sudden it's getting closer now as time goes on. And so there's recounts that have to be done. There are irregularities that have to be looked into. But that's all just part of our process. And if necessary, courts will have to arbitrate.
Well, I know you went pretty hard after Fox News recently when they called Arizona so early. The AP tweeted this out today, and I want to get your reaction. Despite what Donald Trump says, the election he, quote unquote, lost to Joe Biden was not tainted by widespread voter fraud or irregularities in how ballots were counted. Do you know anything about these irregularities or voter fraud that's been happening or been alleged?
Here's what I do know, Chris. I do know that there's more evidence of voter fraud than there was that there should have been an impeachment. And when you look at what happened on election night, when Donald Trump easily ended up winning Florida, and they were able to count all their votes, by the way, one of the largest states in the country, they counted them all that night. It's amazing how that can work. And you see what happened then in Ohio, and then all of a sudden those 4 or 5 southeastern states where he was leading by a lot, they had to sort of stop and recalibrate and start over with the counting. I mean, that raises questions. And when you see hundreds of thousands of ballots coming by mail, and something, by the way, he warned about, he being the president, warned, hey, this is wrought with the opportunity for fraud. I think there's enough there certainly to cause people to wonder. And when you see some of the lack of transparency, the Fargo Forum Police has misrepresented, not misrepresented, but really miswritten my statements about the lack of integrity with Republicans being able to observe the counting in Pennsylvania, and they'll probably do it again after this show. But the reality is, a judge in Pennsylvania had to order the polling places or the counting rooms to allow Republican observers to be within 6 feet. They were letting them in the room, but they were 150 feet away or 50 feet away, 30 feet away at the closest. That's not appropriate. So, Chris, it's again, I haven't seen any, quote, evidence of fraud, but I also know there are hundreds of affidavits that have been signed by people who say they have seen it. And boy, we spent 4 years with a cloud over the presidency of Donald Trump over a lot flimsier things than hundreds of affidavits. The New York Times goes on a blockbuster story based on unnamed sources, only to be refuted by dozens of named sources. And so, the hypocrisy is rich.
And let's get to this, because I'm sure you're aware of what was called Operation Mockingbird back in the day, and I don't want to get into the details, so hopefully you know what I'm referring to there. But I want to share with a clip for you. This is from the first debate with Chris Wallace and Joe Biden, and then talk about what the media is doing. So let's listen to this, and then I'll get your reaction, sir.
Vice President Biden, final question for you. Will you urge your supporters to stay calm while the vote is counted, and will you pledge not to declare victory until the election is independently certified?
Yes, and here's the deal. They count the ballots, as you pointed out. some of these ballots in some states can't even be opened until Election Day. And if there's thousands of ballots, it's going to take time to do it.
So your reaction, sir?
Well, okay. I mean, so far they haven't accepted the results of the election 4 years ago, but now he's asked this question. I don't know specifically what you want me to address in that.
I'm saying he was just asked, are you going to wait to declare that you're president-elect until they're
independently verified?
They have not been certified, and here you've got the media going out and touting that he's Mr. President-elect.
Well, the problem is that the media thinks they're the independent verifier, but they are anything but independent these days, as we know. And as bad as the networks are, and as bad as CNN and MSNBC are, the social media is even worse in terms of their bias. And so we're right to be skeptical. The president's right to want to get recounts in places where there's very few votes that separate them. With regard to Fox News and their call of Arizona, every day, to this day, the votes in Arizona get closer and closer and closer to the point now where it's less than a half a point spread. Here we are a week and a day since the election, and Arizona, where Donald Trump had a 2-1 advantage, Fox News hasn't felt compelled to call that race yet. Gee, how can we be sure a week later?
And sir, you've been in this game a long time. I mean, to see that Alaska hasn't been called yet, we know where that's going to go. I think North Carolina, is just getting called. It seems strange. And I want to bring this up in this context where I tweeted this out and it got a ton of play. Yes. And I want to see if you can explain this to me. GOP lost 0 House races. They picked up House seats. You guys looks like you're going to hold the majority in the Senate. You stayed with every state legislature. You flipped the New Hampshire legislature. Dems spend hundreds of millions of dollars. The thing I didn't put in here is the fact that also President Trump had the most minority votes, I think, since 1960 or in a long, long time. Right. And yet he loses. How do you explain that?
Well, it's hard to explain, Chris, but that doesn't mean it's impossible. And I think that's the rub here. I mean, anomalies aren't evidence. Unusual situations aren't evidence. Even 150,000 ballots that came in a clump, but only had one candidate they voted for, and that was the president, and it was all Joe Biden. Even that doesn't say, hey, there's something illegal here. But it ought to present some curiosity to our mainstream media, and it simply doesn't. They're not curious about anything. They're not curious about Hunter Biden. I mean, they call that a debunked, a largely discredited story for the last couple of years, and all of a sudden you have his laptop, you have people in the email chain saying it's real, and yet they're not even a little bit curious. They have no curiosity about the things that you just pointed to. They just simply want to accept it because they like the outcome that their narrative presents. I'm not saying that there was fraud. I'm not saying that the election was stolen, but we certainly ought to be able to look into this. And by the way, Chris, here's another trend that bothers me a lot about the media. They seem to be just fine with voter fraud as long as it's not widespread, systemic, or doesn't change the results. When did our tolerance on this Veterans Day, as we honor the people who were willing and in many cases did make the ultimate sacrifice for our right to be self-governed, why would we look the other way if there's a bunch of voter fraud, a bunch of people voting twice, or dead people voting, or people getting unsolicited ballots and then having them harvested by activists? Why do we tolerate that just because it may not have changed the election?
And let's take it one step further. I mean, you bring up the media, but let me ask you this. You hear Joe Biden talking about, hey, I want to unite this country, which, hey, I would love to see that happen. Sure. My question for you is, do you know of one Democrat that has come out and said, hey, you know what? Maybe there are some irregularities, maybe they're not, but let's investigate every single one of them to ensure that if Joe Biden is the best man that wins, then you know what? There's no doubt. If you had one Democrat come out and call for any investigations into this, and if so, and if not, why not?
Well, remember, we're talking about the party that impeached the president with zero evidence. We're talking about the party that championed a special counsel investigation into Russian collusion, that not only did they have zero evidence before they started it, they had zero evidence when it was all over. We're talking about a party that paid for a fake dossier that was prepared by a foreign agent on behalf of the Hillary Clinton campaign to go to get warrants to spy on American citizens to try to discredit the President Trump's administration even before he became president. So why would we be surprised that they're not calling for calm? Now, by the way, let's remember what's not happening. Let's celebrate the fact that nobody's buildings have been burned down, nobody's windows have been smashed, no cars have been set on fire, no violent riots in the streets, because ever since Joe Biden was quote named president-elect by the Associated Press. But there were a lot of businesses preparing for that in the eventuality that Donald Trump was elected, because the Democratic base, reacts violently to Republican presidents winning, evidently. So.
Thanks so much to Senator Cramer. There's a lot more to that conversation. He's on the Armed Services Committee as well. So we talked about the firing of Mark Esper and some other things happening at a national security level. Just go to our Facebook page. It's facebook.com/POV now. You can see the rest of it there.